As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. Today we have a first-time guest, David Quintieri, author of The Money GPS, a best-selling reference book on Amazon.com about personal finance and the greater economy and the risks that it poses. David is here with us on Reluctant Preppers to answer questions about what's going on in the world economy, the perils that are present due to fiat money and a spiraling sovereign debt of nations. And he's here to tell us about what that means to the average individual and the ordinary homeowner who wants to prepare and take responsibility for his family's well-being and future. David, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you for having me on.
We've seen a number of your podcasts, which you produce very regularly on your channel at themoneygps.com. And if you could just take one moment to give an understanding to our viewers of what your mission is with themoneygps.com.
If I want to put it into one word, it would be truth. But to give you a little bit more of an explanation, basically, I take the government data, I take the mainstream media news, I take declassified documents, I put them into really succinct packages, really get as much information as possible into the videos, and try to basically not show too much of an opinion and really just focus on fact after fact after fact, and that's it. Shut the video off, basically. So it's about 10 minutes each, and I post almost every single day, and it ranges from geopolitical information to financial, a little bit of health and other topics in there as well.
Well, we're glad you're here with us here on Reluctant Preppers. We wanted to follow up with some topics you've addressed on some recent podcasts. We had a guest, Alistair McLeod from goldmoney.com, on recently, and our viewers have been quite keenly following the expose that he did about the upcoming collapse and breakup of the Eurozone. A lot of people have seen weaknesses forming in the Eurozone over the past several years, with Greece and other countries showing clear signs of economic stress and civil unrest. There's been talk of potentially Britain leaving the Eurozone or other countries. And in a recent podcast, you highlighted the plight of extremely high levels of debt burden that are being faced by a number of the countries in Europe, and how much worse things have become for them over even recent years, and why we should understand that signals the stresses that are likely to cause a breakup. Before you go into that, I'll give a little bit of why this is so keenly watched by our viewers. Is a lot of people who are concerned about preparedness have already decided that they don't fully trust the line that they're being given in the commercial network news or mainstream media, other sources of financial insight, or the official government statistics, that sort of thing. And they're responsible in their own lives, watching their debt levels, making sure they live within their means, trying to set aside for hard times, that sort of thing. But they're very concerned about the timing of sort of signs of the time, when we have early warning signs that things are likely to be at the beginning of a crack up. You know, if the dam is going to burst, when are the first major cracks forming? Because people want to be able to have indications that they can understand when things are changing, when we're reaching a tipping point. So with that in mind, if you could help us see what you've been seeing about the health or lack thereof in the Eurozone, what specific countries seem to be at the most peril, why the situation there is showing specific signs that could lead to a Eurozone breakup. And if that happens, would that be an early indicator of a more global propagation of that breakup that could affect the U.S. and other Northern American countries?
Okay, so let's touch on a few points here. First of all, one of the biggest issues that we face in the Eurozone is essentially too much debt. The debt has been, as you've said, a big burden on all of the economies within the Eurozone, but also the wider area too. So with too much debt, there is obviously this issue where how will it ever be paid back? So if it's owed to another country, how will they ever be able to pay them back? This is the concern that for me, not apparently for these nations in particular, but they essentially, what I'm trying to get to is, are not going to be able to pay back. So where does that debt have to go? And the debt will have to be consumed by the central banks. When the central bank buys debt, they do so obviously with printed money. This will eventually make its way into the real economy, and that would be, let's say, food prices rising as one example, perhaps energy prices rising. So you can see in Europe, just as one small example, gasoline prices are very high comparatively to, let's say, the US. This is just, as I said, one small thing. But if you look to the other issue as well, where we generally like to compare debt to GDP, the gross domestic product, and that number there is often what they use to determine the health, not necessarily the GDP itself, but the debt to GDP. And this is how they say, well, we can manage this amount of debt because we have this amount of GDP. But in Europe, and I'm sure everywhere else, they are now legally allowed to use illegal conduct, such as drugs, as a part of their GDP, because they say, look, yes, it's illegal, but that's part of our economy. And this is when you know that they've died a long time ago. I've labeled this as the Euroviral contagion because it's spreading throughout. Now, you wanted me to sort of point the finger at individual countries. What we saw with Greece was, to me, very big. Now, a lot of people made the, let's call it, excuse that Greece being so small to the global economy isn't really enough to topple everything. But that's not the way it works. It's a domino effect. Look at what happened during the financial crisis, as we saw one company that may have not really been that big, let's say it was worth $1 billion, for example. In the grand scheme of things, $1 billion really isn't that much. But it's the ripple effect that really is of major concern. And that's what those in the mainstream media really like to hide from those out there who want to be actually aware. What I would say is that we need to watch countries like Greece. It's still not done yet. They're still going through this bailout. And then you have other nations, larger nations like Italy and like Spain, which are very important. I believe those are three very key countries that we need to be watching. Look at their debt levels and look at also the decisions that are made in terms of where their funding is going. Also look at any particular banks that have begun to fail, because it's not over yet. See, the mainstream media doesn't like to cover what's happening or what happened during the financial crisis, but banks are still undergoing stress to this day, and many of them are looking at that borderline between, let's say, pass and fail. And I believe that we will encounter some failures. And then what happens is that the government will have to come in to support them, whether that's nationalizing that particular bank or the whole banking industry in that country, or they will do some sort of deal with another institution where they would buy up all of the toxic assets at a discount. There's many options here, but I would look at the banking system itself, look at the individual companies which are looking weak, which are on the borderline. There are many, I've covered it on my channel. And then also look at the nations and their decisions themselves.
When you mentioned the risk of spreading of this domino effect, what would be a scenario that you think is probable or likely? I mean, you've already seen when Greece was having riots and all signs were pointing to a very serious tumult there, that there was stress between the other member nations of the EU as far as whether or not to continue to bail out Greece, whether to cut them loose. Also, there was civil unrest in Greece from the people not necessarily being willing to accept the austerity measures or other conditions that would come with the bailout. But how do you see this? What do you see being a domino effect? I mean, what if one economy like Greece were to fail or one bank there were to fail? How does that actually upset the rest of the system?
Right. So what we could have is multiple scenarios that we encounter over a relatively short period of time happening in different countries, different cities. So just as an example, food prices could be rising in Greece dramatically and people will take to the streets. But there also could be a bank holiday called in, let's say, London, for example, and people are very upset. They can't get their money out of the banking system and things start to, let's say, evolve, and there again, they take to the streets, riots start occurring. You could have other instances where in the US, let's say a major city in the US, where people start to revolt. And then again, you have the police on the streets, and militarized police. This is what they've been training for in the US. So really, it could happen for a multitude of reasons. But ultimately, I think the most important, the key indicators we need to look at are, in fact, the financial industry. Although geopolitically, we have some things to worry about coming up, definitely with the election in the U.S. There could be, some instability around that time of the election, both before and after. So we need to look for that. But I believe that the financial system, the cracks have already appeared, and we could encounter something like a bank holiday. I believe that if they go ahead with the bail-in strategy that the G20 nations did agree upon not too long ago, that they actually start pulling money out of people's accounts, that this could in fact cause a major spark and could lead to something much bigger. But only time will tell. There are many different reasons. I mean, let's just see if I can list a few off. We have the bail-in, we have a massive inflation, we have food prices rising, we have the potential for a bank holiday where your money is, you're locked out of your money, but also the situation where upon reopening that bank, that there is a devaluation of the currency. Wouldn't be the first time this has happened. We could have the possibility of war. We could have the possibility of, I'm just saying the possibility here, of the suspended elections due to some crisis that has happened. There could be many different reasons why. I would say, and I'm sure that your viewers are already on this way, but to be prepared in advance. We need to be prepared today, not tomorrow.
Well, let's talk a little bit about those steps of preparedness, because we've had, and you mentioned in a recent video, I believe it was last year, about the confusion around people thinking that it's best to reduce your personal debt if the government isn't doing it, if the banks and the government are not, but they're just going on this huge debting binge, but the individual, to protect themselves, needs to reduce or eliminate their debt, versus some people have promoted this idea of the biggest debtor wins. In the case of a currency reset or an economic collapse, why not go ahead and carry some huge debt? Because if all the books are going to go to, if the value of the dollars are going to go to zero, then your debt goes to zero and you're off scot-free. So can you put some light behind that? Is it a good idea or a bad idea to take out a lot of debt in order to acquire assets, thinking that that'll get you off free if the currency collapses?
I'm glad you asked this question, because I talk about it all the time on my channel and many do disagree, and it's unfortunate. But here is what I'll say. We have nations, we have corporations, and we have people all around the world consuming at a rate that's never happened before. We have debt in the highest levels that have historically ever been seen. And these numbers do fluctuate, but on average, that's the situation. So people right now are essentially betting on the fact that I'll spend as much money as I possibly can today and not be concerned about tomorrow, because there's probably going to be an inflation or hyperinflation, and the debt is going to be wiped off, and I'm going to be rich because I have all these assets, so I made such a great decision to do so. Here is the failure in that thinking. Most importantly, we have financial corporations in collusion with big government. That is pretty clear. I'm sure everyone will agree with that. If not, then just turn the pages back in history here and look at the financial crisis. We determined that already. So we know that they're in this collusion. They've created this system. Even if you just look as far back as 1913 with the creation of the Federal Reserve, you know that this system has been built by these individuals. They created the monetary system itself. They are the ones who deal with this central banking, which brings it to the commercial banks, which brings it into your hands. They control the monetary system. They control the debt. They control everything. In fact, they built it from the ground up. They took away what was supporting it, gold, and now you have nothing but fiat. They will use the debt that we've created, that we've accumulated, whether it's on a national level, because remember, these bankers don't work for any particular country. These are, let's say, quasi-private or quasi-government banking institutions, also known as the Federal Reserve, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of Canada, wherever you are. And they're going to use this system of debt as a method of control. In fact, they already do today. So why in the world would they let this system go scot-free? Why would they let you go scot-free when they have you right now in their grip? They manipulate the stock market up and down. They've manipulated the price of gold. They've manipulated the price of silver, and every single which way the stocks move up and down every single day is not a natural force any longer. These are computers that are simply playing a movie. We're watching this dream, essentially, all created and crafted by the central bankers. So you're telling me that they're going to let it all go because they're going to somehow lose control tomorrow? That to me seems unlikely. Yes, it could be possible. Doesn't seem probable. Doesn't seem likely to me.
When you mentioned people who have been accumulating a lot of assets and debt at the same time, I've heard that described as the trade imbalance over the last several decades between the United States and China, for example, is one of China sending manufactured goods to the U.S. and U.S. sending fiat currency to China, and the stresses and the imbalances just continuing to grow to where so many of the goods have been brought onshore at the U.S. and so much fiat currency been sent to China, and debt, holding of U.S. debt, that is, and that when the old saying of the hand that gives is above the hand that receives, who holds your debt, you're obligated, you're obliged to them. So people are concerned about independence and lack of freedom, and that's one of the things you've talked about, I believe, on your channel, is it's hard to really be free if you're not free from debt. So besides that action of trying to pay down and pay off and get out of debt, what other actions can an individual take on the personal scale, or on the individual household scale, to prepare and protect themselves from these manipulations on this large scale? Absolutely.
So what we need to do is really sit down with a pen and a paper and understand, what you have currently, let's say your assets, your income, your savings, and determine what you can afford. So ultimately it comes down to that. What I believe is most important is self-sufficiency. We can call that preparation, but essentially a lot of people talk about being off the grid. I don't use that term on my channel specifically because a lot of people sort of categorize that and put it in a negative light, but I do think that is great. I call it self-sufficiency. And ultimately, solar panels. And people think, I can't afford solar panels. It's too expensive. But if you look at it, compared to many people, what they have in their 401ks, RRSPs, supers, wherever you live, their retirement accounts, actually, they probably have enough to buy the solar panels. And instead of keeping their money in this retirement account, where who knows what the value will be tomorrow, you can actually buy something today that will provide you with electricity. And of course, the government gives tax incentives, tax rebates to many individual cities or states or provinces. So look into that. Type in solar panel rebate and then the name of your city or the name of your province or state. And this one right here will allow you to maybe look at it a little bit deeper and think, well, you know what? It's actually not going to really cost me that much at all. So that's one thing. Food preparation, obviously essential. You need to eat. That's the most important thing. I do believe that a small amount of storable food is essential. Not to go overboard, because I think that you can definitely go overboard. I think simple things like big bags of rice are something that you can consume regularly. So it's not necessarily freeze-dried food, but you'll consume them regularly, but has the option, let's say, to be consumed later down the road. So that's one thing that's important, but also more important, I believe, is to have a garden. A garden is absolutely critical. There's no way around this, because you're going to be able to grow your own food and determine what goes into these plants. It's amazing to see what just a few seeds can produce over time. So that's important as well. Water being important. You want a water catch system, drip irrigation if you can, to water those plants, really conserve the water. You want to have a water filter. Something that doesn't require power is great, because something like the Big Berkey, which I have, is excellent. It's very, very clean water, and as I said, it doesn't require any power. Let's talk about precious metals very briefly. I believe it's important to have precious metals. They're excellent, although they do not provide passive income. They do give you the ability to hold wealth for very long periods of time. The price that you see, this is what gets me, because a lot of people say, well, gold's gone down a lot. Aren't you concerned about that? I don't want to invest in it. The real price should be 400 an ounce. The real price should be 20,000 an ounce. I say you buy it and you hold it, and buy it in small denominations, gold, silver, and you can even get into platinum and palladium if you choose to do so, although I would definitely weigh more on the side of silver and gold. But essentially what we want to have is a little bit of precious metals in small denominations, and everything including junk, silver, common coins, and just to have as a well-diversified portfolio of self-sufficiency, of preparation. You don't ever want to necessarily sell that gold and silver. You want it to preserve wealth. That's the function, and that's what it does. People say all the time about the prices. I say you're looking at the futures market. You're looking at a piece of paper, not gold. You're not looking at gold when you see that price. You're looking at simply a number on a screen, and that's in their own manipulated system. I've had enough of that system. You just buy it and you hold it, and that's what its function is. Does it very well.
Two more questions. One is about the likely transition if there is a major collapse of the current currency system. What do you foresee as being a likely possible avenue of what would come next? Will there be no more currency? Will there be a new currency that's just like the old one, just fiat all over again? Do you see more likely that there'll be something that's actually backed by something tangible? What do you think is most likely, some of the most likely outcomes that will happen after a major disruption of the financial markets or a major disruption of currencies?
Absolutely. So I've talked about this many times before. What I would say is that it's all about being political these days. And the most political thing you can do is do it right under people's noses and have them not even know that it happened. And the way you do this is you simply let them use the existing currency system on their end. So they'll be using their US dollars, they'll be using their credit cards, they'll be using their all different forms of electronic and paper checks and everything else. But in the back's end, they'll be using something along the lines of an IMF SDR. So we're talking about a digital currency here, entirely digital, entirely fiat. And that's what I believe will be the case. We'll have an emergency meeting. The stock market is falling. The G20, the IMF, the World Bank, everybody gets together and they say, look, we need to fix it. Of course, they have the solution provided all the way in advance. And they say, we need to fix it. What are we going to do? They say, look, let's use this IMF SDR or something equivalent to back your currency systems. Therefore, it will be stable. It will be well diversified. It's like a collateralized debt obligation, a CDO, except of currencies. And this is what they'll do. They take a whole bunch of garbage where it's all filled with debt, and they're going to make it into a currency system. And of course, this is just a theory at this point, but I believe it would be something along these lines. It's going to be no change or very little change to the average individual, other than the fact that now we have more monetary control, less decisions will be able to be made by our own government. And lo and behold, we'll be stuck with the short end of the stick yet again.
A follow-on question with that one is, as you've talked about people wisely considering having a certain portion of their wealth that they can store in precious metals, do you see a scenario in the next short period of time here where there could possibly be deflation, and so people might actually want to also have some actual cash currency, actual coins and bills in their possession?
I do think, in fact, I believe that we will enter, and I'm definitely with Mike Maloney on this one, that we will enter a state of deflation prior to a major inflation or a hyperinflation. I do believe this because real money will pull out of the system. That's the deflation. And then the central banks go in and ramp up the printing presses, and we encounter a high inflation or hyperinflation. Now, just to think about this, how much cash do you really want to have? Well, ultimately, it depends on how many methods of preparation that you do have. If you don't have things like a garden or water supply, your water system set up and essentials, then you probably shouldn't have as much of the cash because you can use that today. But I do believe that you would want, it's hard to really quantify in numbers, but you would want a small amount. Yes, keep them and keep them in low denominations. It's very crucial, as far as I'm concerned, to have everything you can in low denominations. I don't think you should go overboard, because in the situation where you are, you keep it in your house and something happens to that money, you're really going to be left out. So I would suggest personally, just don't go overboard with it, but some is good to have. And just to clarify, outside of the banking system.
And if we could bring it back now, the last question I have is about what you started with, your very first mission statement of truth. The subtitle of our channel is Helping You Be Aware and Prepared, and awareness begins with truth. And if people are feeling very disappointed, discouraged, frustrated, and at their wits' end about the ability to really discern truth based on commonly available data or news, where do you recommend people go to keep truly informed about what's really going on?
Some of the best books I've ever read have been Austrian economics. I believe that you find it difficult to refute any of that. So I've read many different authors, Murray and Rothbard just being one example of that. So I like to view the news, daily, but I don't really like to believe everything that I'm reading there. I like to connect the dots and everything, but I don't necessarily believe everything that's in the news media, because ultimately we know how manipulated it is. But some of the sources that I like are Zero Hedge. I also like the Drudge Report. And those are my two primary ones. But I do often, let's say I go to startpage.com, which some of your viewers may know, check out Startpage and try to dig into the internet on my own and not necessarily go to any particular website to try and find the information, because everyone has their own bias. Even Drudge, for example, has their own bias, and I have a bias, and everyone has a bias. So they may leave out information. So we don't want to necessarily just stick to only media sources. We want to try and use the internet to the best of its ability at this time while we still have it, and try to really go about this on our own as much as possible.
Well, David Quintieri from themoneygps.com, if people want to find out more about your work, they can visit themoneygps.com. And what resources will they find there?
On my website, it has my free e-course, which is basically YouTube videos that I've done that are very instructional to people who are not really focused on the financial system. They don't really care too much, but they want to learn some basics. So I went through, what is a bail-in, what is a derivative, and how the banking system works and everything. So really simple, using diagrams and everything else to make it easy for people, because a lot of people weren't taught this. And in fact, most people aren't taught this in our schools, that's for sure. So I've tried to basically open people's eyes in this way and give it away for free. That's the best thing I've found. On the website, there's also a link for the book there too. You can see all my YouTube videos on there as well. And I've done free ebooks as well. If you want to check those out there, that's at themoneygps.com. But all my updates are available on YouTube as well. So if you just type in The Money GPS into YouTube, you see my channel.
Well, David, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers. We're very glad to have had you, and it's great the service and the mission that you're doing, bringing your perspective and opening up some of that information that otherwise most people are not going to be able to do what you do. And so your service of breaking open those reports and showing and making the connections and connecting the dots for people is an invaluable service. And we're glad that you joined us here on Reluctant Preppers.
Thank you very much for having me on.